She's there, headphones in, maybe fiddling with her phone, distracted by one notification or another. You're just a few steps away in a cafe, a bookstore, maybe in a line somewhere. And at that moment you feel, if you open your mouth now, you'll sound like just another guy, just another man trying to start a conversation, just another guy she's learned to ignore without guilt. This is where 98% of men back off, and 2% make history. Sexual tension isn't born from touching or from direct flirting. It's born from contrast. It starts when you appear in her world as an unexpected event, not a predictable attempt at conquest. The mistake most people make is thinking that seduction is something you turn on when you decide to flirt. But the true seducer is the one who carries tension in his body before he even says a word. He's the interruption of boredom itself, the strange factor that creates a micro short circuit in her monotonous reality. And believe me, this can happen anywhere. You don't need a party, a drink, or an elaborate look. You just need to know how to control the mood. Because what seduces is not the external context. It's the internal narrative you provoke in her. And that starts with the right look at the wrong time. Imagine two actors in a movie. They're sitting in silence in a waiting room. One looks at the other. There's no music, no speech, no sign of romance. But the director gives a subtle order. Hold your gaze for a second longer. Then smile. But not with your lips, with your eyes. That scene would be memorable, because even without words, the mood would change. That's the secret, creating a micro-environment where the mood changes, where time slows down for a second as if something invisible had happened, something that no one around noticed, but she felt. And she can no longer ignore it. But that requires mastery, because the neutral environment, the common scenario, is where sexual tension becomes an advanced art. The man who can generate desire and silence under the cold light of a supermarket is the same man who can give you goosebumps at a party without laying a finger on your neck. Why? Because he carries intensity. This type of energy is almost animal primal, but controlled. A type of vibration that communicates without words. I saw you not as someone who passed by, but as someone who interested me, and I'm letting you see that without asking for permission. And that's what turns sexual tension into a hypnotic experience. But don't confuse this with staring. The tense gaze is not invasive. It's receptive, but firm. It's a gaze that doesn't look away with guilt, but also doesn't impose itself with arrogance. It's the gaze of someone who has presence. And presence in this game is worth more than appearance. Faye Alves called this the pause before the orange juice. He asked for a juice but pretended to be distracted. He created a micro-ritual where what seduced was not the request, but the rhythm. It was the breaking of expectations, the subtle intention hidden between pauses and glances, and what seemed natural was completely strategic. This is the paradox. The more rehearsed you seem, the less tension you generate. The more natural your control over the atmosphere, the more tension you create. Because sexual tension is not a product of explicit desire. It is the result of doubt of that unspoken question. Is he interested, or is it just naturally this way? And this brings us to a powerful philosophical principle. Mystery moves more than certainty, Nietzsche said. What is good? Anything that increases power, and what increases social power faster than provoking desire, without ever openly declaring it. This is where the neutral environment becomes your greatest weapon. Because while all men wait for the right place to show interest, the true master of tension creates the space. He doesn't wait for the environment to favor his desire. He introduces desire into the environment. He sabotages normality with presence. And women biologically trained to perceive social distances pick up on this instantly. She feels the change even if she doesn't understand it rationally. And that's when she starts to imagine. You could be at the checkout counter at the pharmacy. You could be in a co-working space, in a shopping mall, coffee shop, or at a conference table. If you master this energy, the energy of I did nothing but did everything, you put her in a state of sensory alert. And a woman who is alert is an attentive woman. Attentive to what you do, to what you don't do, and most importantly, to what you're thinking that you didn't say. It's in this void that sexual tension grows in the space between what you do and what you avoid. But why does this work? Because the human brain hates blank spaces. It needs to fill in the gaps. So, when you provoke an emotion without verbalizing intention, her brain fills in the rest with assumptions, interpretations, and if you're good, fantasies. And there is no seduction more powerful than the fantasy created in the mind of the one who desires. It is always stronger than the spoken phrase. The artist does not need to paint the woman naked. All it takes is a shadow, a line, a falling cloth, and desire builds in the mind of the one who sees it. In the same way, you do not need to talk about sex to generate sexual tension. You only need to carry a vibration that suggests depth, intention, and instinctive elegance. Now comes the critical part. All of this only works if it is sustained with non-reaction. A man who gets nervous about his own desire loses the tension he has built. A woman needs to feel that you feel the tension, but are not desperate to release it. That is what separates the desirable from the needy. The seducer from the forced, the leader from the clown. Want a modern example? Think of Thomas Shelby. Peaky Blinders. He doesn't say anything. He does little. But his silence carries gunpowder. Or James Bond. Not the guy who says catchphrases, but the one who walks into a room and changes the mood. These characters work because they understand a hidden principle of attraction. Whoever takes up the most emotional space in a room controls the reactions of others. And now comes the most brutal twist. You don't have to be handsome, rich, or famous to take up that space. You just have to be hard to ignore. And being hard to ignore isn't about being flamboyant. It's about being magnetically contradictory. You're quiet but intense. You don't say much, but everything you say carries weight. You seem distracted, but when you look at her, it's like you know something she doesn't. These contradictions create the gap. And where there's a gap, there's imagination. So, the next time you're in a random place, that neutral environment where no one expects tension, remember, desire doesn't come from what you do. It comes from what you let her imagine you would do if she asked. And that's where the second level begins. Because the tension that arises in the environment moves to the body, and the body, when stimulated, without direct touch, responds more strongly than logic. When the environment is already intoxicated by your presence, the next step is not to touch her body. It is to touch her nervous system without touching her. Because the human body responds to invisible stimuli with real physical reactions. Goosebumps do not come from touch. They come from the meaning that touch carries. And you can create that meaning without ever crossing the line of physical contact. This is where the magic of great seducers begins. It is not about how many times you touched her. It is about how many times she imagined you could have touched her and didn't. It is the touch that you withhold, that you suggest, that you almost execute, but leave suspended in the air as if it were part of an unfinished dance. This phantom touch is more powerful than any explicit approach, because it engages the brain in the game of almost. And almost is the cruelest and most seductive point between anticipation and realization. The secret lies in sensory evocation. The greatest weapon of those who want to touch without touching is language. But not just any language. Words that describe texture, temperature, rhythm, words that trigger sensations in the body as if she were experiencing it. You don't say that blouse is pretty. You say that fabric feels warm. You know that soft touch that makes you want to close your eyes. And then, without her realizing it, her body starts to react as if she were being touched. Because the brain doesn't differentiate between a real memory and a vivid recall. Neuroscience has already proven that when remembering a physical sensation, the same neural centers that were activated in the real experience are reactivated. This means that when you talk about heat, texture, and proximity in a suggestive way, you are literally awakening in her the bodily memory of touch even without touching her. But phantom touch goes beyond words. It is in the subtle gesture. For example, when telling someone something, you touch your own arm lightly, saying, "It feels like this," and let her observe. You are not asking her to touch her. You are showing her what the touch would be like, using yourself as a model. This indirect display is interpreted as security, dominance, and implicit sensuality. If she's receptive, she'll fill the gap herself. Perhaps with a glance that drops to your hand, perhaps with a subtle movement closer. And if she doesn't do anything, that's okay. The tension just keeps building. What you need to understand is that seduction isn't about moving forward. It's about influencing what the other person wants to happen. And that requires you to install ideas, not just behaviors. Phantom touch is an implanted idea. It's like a whisper that she didn't hear, but felt. Imagine you are in a public environment, like a co-working space or a coffee shop. Everything is formal, social, polite, but between one exchange of glances and another, you mention something like, It's funny how certain people have that kind of presence that you feel even before you touch them. There are people who just walk by and give you goosebumps. You're not talking about her, but you are. You're not talking about touching, but you are. You just planted the image and her body will react to the suggestion. This is the power of oblique communication. Nietzsche once said, "The greatest style is the one that says everything without having to name anything." Seduction is exactly that, saying it with tone, with a look, with a pause, not with words. Most men play a game trying to make a woman react to him, but the true seducer enters the field of suggestion. He talks about sensations, activates memories, creates body metaphors, talks about things that her body understands before her brain even accepts them. He installs fantasies like someone planting seeds, and every woman who is fertile in emotion will germinate this with her own images. When she starts to associate you with sensations and not with declarations, she begins to feel your presence even in your absence. And that is the turning point, because then she is no longer observing you. She's remembering you in a way she cannot control. Every little pause of yours, every ambiguous choice of words, every almost gesture that was not completed, begins to echo in her sensory memory. You become not only someone interesting, you become someone significant. And when a woman begins to feel you in her own body, the rest is automatic. But be careful. This game does not work if you seem mechanical or desperate to be noticed. Phantom touch is effective when it comes from an authentic place. You need to be comfortable with the idea of not touching. You need to enjoy tensing the air, not rushing to the result, because the more you enjoy the suspense, the more she immerses herself in the game, and that is when the mood becomes intoxicating. Phantom touch also works with stories. You tell a scene where someone is surprised by a touch, a shiver, a slight tug of the hand, a sudden heat. When narrating this scene, use words that describe the body, the reactions. Make her imagine it, not just hear it. The trick is to make her see herself in that scene. Her body will react even without realizing it. There is a passage in Neil Strauss's The Game where the best pickup artists did not touch their students or targets directly. They guided them emotionally with metaphors, images, and small sensory instructions. Something like, imagine if someone put their hand here, or you know when someone comes up behind you and grabs you slowly. These images were powerful weapons because the body does not know how to distinguish the real from the vivid. And even more powerful when you combine phantom touch with a neutral environment. When you create tension in a place that does not allow tension, this generates such intense emotional dissonance that her brain goes into a state of alert. Why am I feeling this here now? This shock is the catalyst for desire, because all excitement comes from a sudden imbalance between context and emotion. It's like dancing a tango in the middle of a library. No one expects it, but when it happens, no one forgets. So, practice the art of subtle presence. Speak little. Use phrases with double meanings. Comment on sensations naturally. Touch your own body calmly when you demonstrate something. Smile as if you were keeping a secret. Look as if you were scanning the soul, not the body. And most importantly, don't be in a hurry. Impatient men create discomfort. Men who know how to take advantage of suspense create fascination. The tension is not the kiss. It's what comes before the kiss. It's the look that explodes in the silence, the joke with pause, the unspoken compliment, the almost touch. Women live for this. They are emotionally trained to interpret these details. And when they find a man who has mastered this invisible game, he becomes irresistible, not because he forces her, but because he provokes her without ever compromising the mood. He is the creator of the mystery, the author of the script that she begins to want to star in. And when her body has been touched 1,000 times by ideas, the first physical touch seems inevitable. It seems right, it seems necessary, but it's not time yet. You've created the mood, you've touched without touching, you've spoken without saying. Now the final ladder is missing, the invisible progression that leads to the kiss, because a kiss that needs to be asked for shouldn't be given, and a true master of tension makes the kiss happen as if it were her idea. But to do that, you need to understand the invisible ladder, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Getting to the kiss was never the problem. The problem is getting there without asking, without breaking the spell, with a soulless phrase like, "Can I kiss you?" Because asking is admitting that you didn't read the mood, didn't pick up on the signals, didn't feel the moment. Asking is placing on her the weight of the decision that should be the responsibility of the tension you built. and poorly constructed tension turns into embarrassment. But well-managed tension turns into desire. Enough desire for the kiss to be inevitable, not proposed. The invisible staircase begins before the first lingering glance and ends at the exact second your lips touch hers. And you both realize there would be no other possible outcome. It is a progression carefully constructed by layers of language, energy, leadership, and emotional response. It is the art of leading without seeming to be leading, a silent game where you install permissions in her unconscious until doubt is overcome by surrender. But this staircase is not made of fixed steps. It is made of reactions. It is the constant reading of the body, the tone of voice, the timing. And that's why she's invisible, because there's no script. There's sensitivity and intention. There's consistency and silence. And there's above all a kind of courage that's unhurried. The courage to hold the tension when everything in you screams for release. This is where most people fail. Let's start at the bottom at the first rung. The long gaze with a pause in the speech. The moment when you stop talking, not for lack of subject matter, but by strategic choice. You blurt out a sentence that suggests more than it delivers. Something like, "There are things that don't need to be said, right?" And instead of continuing, you let the silence set in. You look at her first in the eyes, then briefly at her mouth, and back to her eyes without exaggeration, without forcing, just as if to hint at an answer. This prolonged silence is an invitation for her body to take over the conversation. And if she doesn't look away or smiles slightly or bites her lip lightly, the ladder has started to climb. The second rung is the micro-touch with contextual purpose. No holding hands, running your hand through her hair, or hugging out of the blue. You start with a symbolic touch, a high five for a joke, a touch on the shoulder to get attention during a story, a playful nudge. Her body understands this as a safe touch, a touch without pressure. But if she doesn't pull away, if she responds with laughter or returns the gesture, her body is saying yes, even if her mind is still deciding. Now comes the third step, touch with leadership. You begin to gently direct her body. Something as simple as pulling her arm to get her out of someone's way, or putting your hand on her back to guide her between people. This activates a primal sense of direction, of protection. Women biologically respond to this gesture as a sign of safety. As long as it's done naturally and calmly, if she accepts this touch without stiffness or even follows the gesture fluidly, you're paving the way for surrender. This is where many men get it wrong. They confuse receptivity with readiness. But you're not done yet. There are still the last steps to take, and they are what differentiate a mechanical kiss from a memorable one. The fourth step is emotional verification. You notice if she is mirroring your gestures, if she is looking at you with the same amount of time as she looks, if she is leaning her body slightly, if she laughs frequently, if she is turning her torso toward you. This is not just body language, it is synchronization. It is the body saying we are dancing to the same music. And when this music is present, the escalation accelerates, without you having to force anything. The fifth step is symbolic touch with emotional reward. Here you can say something like, "Seriously, this deserves a hug," and open your arms slowly. Don't invade. Invite. If she accepts the hug with abandon, full body, arms firm, head close, the kiss is already close, but you're not kissing her yet. Not yet. You're now in a position to feel her response within the hug. How she breathes. If she touches her cheek, if she stays there for a few seconds, and then at the exact moment you pull away from the hug, comes the sixth step, the final tense phrase. It could be something like, "If you keep looking at me like that, you're going to make me kiss you." This phrase is the closing of the riddle. It's the moment when you expose the tension without making it explicit. You're not asking, you're reacting. And you're saying that the kiss isn't your decision. It's a consequence of the chemistry between you. This removes the pressure and makes the kiss a natural part of the sequence. If she smiles or looks at your mouth or says nothing, the ladder has already taken you to the edge of the cliff. Now is the time for the final micro move. You move in slowly, without hesitation, but without aggression. And even here, you let her body make the final decision. If she doesn't pull away, if her eyes stay fixed on yours, if her lips relax, you kiss. Not with hunger, with presence, with control, with the kind of intensity that shows you could stop at any moment, but you choose to keep going, because that's the secret. The kiss shouldn't feel like the end of the tension. It should feel like the beginning of another deeper layer. But what happens if she pulls back? If she turns her face away or breaks off the gesture, You don't lose power. You just take a step down. You smile slightly, change the focus, tell a joke, get back to storytelling. You show that your value is not conditioned on the success of the kiss. That in itself reactivates interest, because you've shown that your masculinity doesn't depend on acceptance, and that's magnetic. You can even try again later, because when the latter is emotional and not forced, it can be taken up again at any time. The tension doesn't go away, it just rests. Now, let's understand why this progression works, because it aligns with the feminine emotional flow. Women don't kiss out of logic, they kiss out of emotional synthesis. They kiss when the body has already been seduced. When the heart has already been activated, when the mind is already numb with unanswered questions, and the invisible ladder does exactly that, it doesn't push the kiss. It makes the kiss seem like the only way out. Robert Greene once said, "Seducers don't force. They create circumstances where the other surrenders without knowing how or why." The invisible ladder is the perfect choreography for this silent surrender. It's the unwritten script of tension, the structure that makes the climax seem spontaneous. And here's a brutal truth. Any man who kisses a woman without going through this emotional ladder is stealing an experience from her. You are delivering a kiss without density, without depth, without emotional charge. And women do not remember shallow kisses. They remember moments when the body and mind were so synchronized that the kiss was just a consequence of what had already happened internally. The invisible staircase is this, the crossing of her mind to her body. And only men who understand this truly master the art of tension. Because in the end, the kiss is just a symbol. The real power lies in the way you took her there, in how much she felt she participated, that she chose, that she desired. A kiss that happens the right way becomes an emotional anchor. It leaves a mark. It generates longing. It generates comparison. She will remember you every time another man tries something similar and fails. And this turns you into something rare, an emotional landmark in her sensory memory. That's why when you apply this ladder, do it with presence. Do it with intention. Not as someone who seeks a happy ending, but as someone who understands that the kiss is just the beginning of a greater dance. The dance where the body speaks before the mouth and where silence screams louder than any declaration. You don't just want to kiss, you want to be remembered. And only those who master the tension until the end are remembered with desire. You no longer need to wonder why she didn't kiss you. Why? The conversation flowed, the laughter was light, the mood seemed good, and yet nothing happened. The answer lies in everything you didn't do, in all the silences you filled with too many words, in all the moments that demanded intensity and you gave away sympathy. Sexual tension is not built with ready-made phrases or superficial techniques. It is an art, a game of invisible layers. A process that begins with the look that stops time, goes through the touch that never happens, and culminates in a kiss that doesn't need permission because it was already accepted before it happened. The man who masters this sequence doesn't need to be handsome, rich, or famous. He just needs to be impossible to ignore because he understands what most people will never learn. The true power of seduction is not in what you do. It's in what you make her feel without understanding why. And now that you know this, the game has changed. You can go into any place, elevator, bar, supermarket, co-working space, and make the air between you two change density. You can make her feel hot even with the air conditioning on because you understand that seduction is about creating a microclimate between two people while the world outside continues on autopilot. But now, I want to hear from you. What was the most unlikely environment where you felt like you could have created tension and didn't know how to act? Or better yet, when was the moment when she expected something from you and you hesitated? Comment here. We'll turn these mistakes into ammunition for the next videos. And if you want to level up even more in the next content, I'll show you how to make her take the initiative after the first kiss. How to make her want more without you chasing. Because a true master doesn't chase, he attracts. This was your first step to stop being just another one and become the one she can't forget.